Hello everyone, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, trying to do a landscape video again because too many people were complaining. And today I'm talking to you about the second episode of the series, D&D Things They've Taught You Wrong on Purpose. And today's topic is about involving your player characters, or your players for that matter. I've heard a lot of people say stuff like, it's really important that your players create elaborate backgrounds for their characters before they come into the game. And then you as a DM must incorporate whatever they've put into those backgrounds into your game. You have to find ways to make the game special for your players by fitting in those sorts of elements. And if your player wants to make some kind of a special snowflake character, even if it's some way anachronistic, you have to figure out a way to fit it in or get as close as possible, because otherwise your players will be unsatisfied. This is the myth that they're teaching you now. And it all comes back to one of the most fundamental lies in the role-playing world today, which is that RPGs are something that are used to create a story. That's not true. I know you've probably heard it, but it's a lie. That's not what happens when you play RPGs. Stories happen, but those are what you call emergent stories. That is to say, they're stories that happen as a result of the action of the game itself. They're not the point of the game. They just might happen, and they don't happen in the same way that literature happens. They happen in the same way that fishing stories or golfing stories happen. It's this thing that you're doing, and sometimes funny stories come out of it, or interesting stories, or amazing shots, or the biggest fish ever, or whatever it is. And that's the same way with RPGs, because an RPG is not a story-making system. What it is it's a virtual world. You create a world, you make it as sophisticated as you want to, though the more sophisticated in terms of how much not realism, but how much of a sense of a living world it gets. It doesn't have to be realistic, because you can never really be realistic in an RPG setting, because I mean you can't simulate everything in reality. But it has to have a feeling. It's a feeling that it's alive. That if you, when you close the books and put it all away, that somehow that world is still there in that little frame, and things are still happening, and things are happening in the world elsewhere than where your characters are. So if you make your characters the center of the universe of your setting, you're destroying that whole concept. That's a great way to go if you're writing a novel. So go be a fan fiction writer or something like that. But if you're being a DM, you want to have a world that feels bigger than your characters. So if your character makes this elaborate story in their background about all this stuff that happens, I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm saying, first of all, they don't need to make that much background. You know, in the really old days, you just made a character and ran with it. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that. In both my Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion books, there are tables to generate backgrounds for everything from social class and family and to like prior important events that happen to your character before you start the campaign. So I don't want you to think I'm against that per se. But the point is, you don't have to, as the DM, suddenly figure out how to incorporate every little character that your players' characters previously encountered because they decided they did, right? It doesn't matter how much one of your players writes about his character's cousin George. You don't have to have cousin George in there necessarily. And there might be very good reasons why you shouldn't. Because you don't want your world to get this sense of unreality just to satisfy the whims of a player who's developed an overly complex background, right? Now, if you're the DM and you want to have, cousin George brutally murdered, or he just shows up and wants to join the party, or he fell in love with the wrong person, or anything like that, you can go ahead and do that. I'm not saying you can't do that. What I'm saying is that the idea that you must do that is a myth. It doesn't make sense. And whether or not these things do connect from the background, do connect to your campaign, shouldn't depend on making the players happy. It should depend on whether or not it makes sense in the context of the world and events happening in the wider world beyond the player characters, whether or not these things end up interconnecting. You as the DM have the veto over everything that the player decides about their character's past. If you don't want your one of your player characters to have, I don't know, won a tournament, then you can just say, you've never won a tournament. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't fit with what I want, right? And obviously, if they want to, I don't know, be a secretly Shintoist in a in a medieval European setting like Lion and Dragon, you can say, no, sorry, Shinto hasn't even been discovered by Europe yet. There's no way you're a secret Shintoist, okay? So you're going to be following the one true church or something like that, right? Or your other option is you can be a heretic, but good luck with that. We'll see how long you live, right? That's perfectly fine. You're allowed to do that. Your players don't get to dictate to you. You control the world. And the reason why you don't want to just thrust these things into your players' experiences in the game, you don't want to, no matter how much they think it's important, if you start tying this stuff in ways that are not organic to the living nature of the world you're trying to create, then that will be sensed, consciously or unconsciously, by your players, and the world will become less immersive. And that's the real purpose of RPGs. RPGs aren't to tell stories. They're to immerse in. They're to go deep into that picture and be a part of it all, right? To connect to all of it. To be a part of this world that is alive and with a character that is alive, okay? And if you're making a situation that makes that world seem a little less living, then no matter how much that might please the characters in the short term, it doesn't enhance the immersive experience in the long term, which is the really, when you get into longer campaigns and really deep experiences, because obviously in a one-shot, none of this matters one way or another. In one-shot, anything goes, right? But I'm assuming you're making a campaign. And in a campaign, there comes a point that only really starts to happen after you've been playing for maybe a year, right? Let's say at least, 125 hours of campaigning, right? And if you've gotten to that point, at the very minimum, then you start to have a whole different sense of the world, a whole different sense of the characters. They come alive in a way that they don't ever. And if all you've ever done before are short adventures or short campaigns, if the longer you've run a world has been 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 sessions, then you have no idea about what I'm talking about. But if you get into a campaign and you start playing it long enough, where 1 year is really the absolute minimum, it doesn't really start getting intensely great until about the second year. So this is another reason to do long campaigns. If you do this, then this world becomes profound, right? It becomes a living entity in this kind of weird, Jordan Peterson sort of pseudo reality that exists it's real, but it's not physically real, right? When we're saying, dragons are real, they're not real like physical matter, but they're real in the sense that these are real things that are happening at another level of our consciousness. And at that level, they are real. And it really is important because those things have different effects, right? So when you get into that sort of space where you can be in that other reality world, this is something that is a changing experience. Changing experience in the same sense that if you'd traveled or done something, been in a really fulfilling university class or something like that, right? I don't know how to put it, but it's this experience that can maybe it won't fundamentally, oh my God, it changed my life, but it'll be something that you won't forget in a different way than if you played a one-shot or a 3-session campaign. It's something that it becomes monumental to your experience as a gamer. And to get there, you have to focus on the world, not on the characters. The characters should grow and gain interesting connections and become a part of this network of what's going on in the world, not because they wrote a 50-page backstory before the campaign started, but as a product of spending a year or 2 years being in this campaign. If they've survived and go through all this, then they have a depth that no amount of clever backstory will ever do. That's why, in fact, I suggest make the backstory as random as possible. Get them out of their comfort zone. Let them play something that they're not used to playing. And then give them time to get to where those connections and that depth is happening, not because of what they were thinking of before the game started, but because of real changing experiences that have happened in the course of the game. That's how you create interconnections, not by pandering to your players at the start, but by giving them the kind of the discipline, the campaign discipline, to get them to the end of a really long campaign, and the most memorable kind. So that's it for today. I'm gonna cut it a little bit shorter than usual because people are also complaining that my videos are too long. But if you like this video and you'd want to see more videos of whatever length, then please subscribe to the channel and support us. Support Inappropriate Characters on Patreon. I don't have my own Patreon. You can also really help us out by sharing, right? Share my videos, share Inappropriate Characters videos, because that's the way that other people find out about them, and it grows the channel. And, buy my books if you want to support me other than that. But mainly, keep watching, subscribe, and share the videos, because that's how we get the truth out there about how people have been taught wrong about D&D on purpose. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Egg with Country Doctor.